Hello everyone, I'm Justin and this is everything you need to know before watching Creed 3, releasing March 3rd. If you end up enjoying this video and want to see more from us, then make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to know anytime we upload a new video. After about 47 years since the first Rocky film's release, the Rocky film universe continues on with the release of Creed 3, the third Creed installment and ninth franchise installment overall. So, before the new movie releases in theaters, we're going to take a look back and run down everything you'll need to know about Adonis Creed's journey so far. But make sure, if you haven't already, to go and watch each installment in the Rocky and Creed franchise, which will be listed in the description, so you can enjoy them for yourself before continuing on with our recap. To begin, let's go back to 1998 Los Angeles, California, where we see a young Adonis Johnson spending time and getting into fights at a juvenile detention center, in which he'd ended up following his mother's death in the mid-90s, leaving him without a parent, since his father had passed before he was born. So he bounced around group homes and ended up in juvie, until eventually, he was discovered by his father's widow, Mary Ann Creed, who revealed to Adonis that his father was actually world champion boxer Apollo Creed, who we first met back in 1975 as he, the undefeated world heavyweight champion, was hyping up a fight set in Philadelphia on New Year's Day against #1 contender Mac Lee Green. All this time promoting the fight nearly turned out to be a waste though, when Green, while training, got himself injured. So, with only 5 weeks until the fight, and with no other contenders available in that time, Apollo instead gave the match a novelty, and offered an unknown Philadelphia fighter the opportunity to face him for the title, with that fighter being the Italian stallion Rocky Balboa, who before gaining this opportunity had been stuck boxing in warehouses, with no one really believing in him outside of his best friend Paulie, as well as Paulie's sister Adrian, who'd later become his girlfriend. Upon receiving this title shot though, he was approached by trainer Mickey Goldmill, owner of Mighty Mick's boxing gym, which Rocky would regularly attend, who then offered to train him for the fight, and Rocky, although refusing at first, since Mick hadn't wanted much to do with him before, eventually accepted the offer. So the two trained over the next 5 weeks, throughout which they grew a close bond while sharpening Rocky's skills, before the fight eventually came to pass. And to the shock of many, Rocky was able to take Apollo to a full 15 rounds, although Creed did still win via split decision. Apollo wasn't settled with just a decision victory though, so he immediately challenged Rocky to a rematch, but Rocky wouldn't accept it until some time later, as he was busy getting married and having a son named Rocky Jr. with Adrian. But the second fight would eventually take place 10 months after the first, and this time Rocky Balboa came out victorious, knocking out Apollo in the 15th round and giving him the first and only loss of his career to become the new world heavyweight champion, gaining Apollo's respect in the process. Sometime following this fight, Apollo decided to retire and return home to Los Angeles with Mary Ann and their 2 kids. But a few years later, he'd once again become involved in the boxing world following the passing of Rocky's trainer Mickey, who had suffered a heart attack just moments before Rocky defended his title against Clubber Lang and died following the bout, which Rocky lost. So Apollo stepped in to train him for the rematch and helped him regain his title. But in exchange for his help, Apollo wanted one more fight with Rocky, this time behind closed doors, and Rocky agreed to the match, which, although we don't see the outcome of it, Rocky claims years later Apollo won. A couple years following this, Apollo got the itch to fight again after hearing of a new boxer on the scene with a bunch of hype from Russia, named Ivan Drago. So he asked Rocky, who was still world champion at the time, to be in his corner for the exhibition fight against him. But Rocky didn't think it would be a great idea, claiming there was no reason for Apollo to go out there and get himself hurt. But he was unable to sway him, so he agreed to be at his side. Things quickly went wrong during his and Drago's eventual clash though, as Drago began continuously pummeling Creed at the end of the first round, worrying Rocky enough to want to stop the fight, but Apollo begged him not to no matter what. So he went back in there and Drago's onslaught continued, with him landing heavy blow after heavy blow before eventually landing what turned out to be a fatal shot, and he was deemed victorious as Creed laid dead on the mat. Prior to his death that night though, Apollo had been engaging in an affair with a woman that he ended up getting pregnant with Adonis. And now Mary Ann, choosing to look past that, takes Donnie in as her own. We then jump forward to 2015, where we see a now adult Donnie taking part in an amateur boxing match in Tijuana, which he wins in the first round via knockout, making him 15-0. He doesn't want to settle for undercard amateur fights in Mexico though, and has dreams of becoming more. So once back in LA, he quits his well-paying job at a security firm to exclusively pursue boxing, and he attempts to begin this journey at the Delphi Boxing Academy, the same place Apollo had trained in. But the gym's owner, Tony Little Duke Evers, the son of Apollo's trainer, Tony Duke Evers, refuses to train him, as he doesn't believe Donnie takes the sport as seriously as he should. So Adonis decides to instead move to Philadelphia in hopes that he'll be able to train under Rocky Balboa. Jumping back again to Apollo Creed's death for a moment, so we can catch up with what Rocky's been up to over the last 30 years. As following Apollo vs. Drago, Rocky, filled with guilt for not having stopped things when he should've, and wanting to avenge his friend, decided to take on Drago himself in Russia. And after a hard-fought back-and-forth battle, Rocky ultimately came out on top. But unfortunately, following this fight, he was then forced to retire, having suffered too much brain damage over his 20-year in-ring career. And over the next 20 years, he'd become owner of his own restaurant, Adrian's, named after his wife, who in 2002 would pass away from ovarian cancer. 4 years following her death, Rocky felt the desire to fight one last time and retire on his own terms. So after being medically cleared, he took part in one final fight against world champion Mason Dixon, with whom he'd managed to go the full 10 rounds before once again losing via split decision. Ever since that fight, he's been content with his career and his life, despite his loved ones no longer being around, as Paulie had died in 2012 while his son since moved to Vancouver with his girlfriend. And he's mostly focused his time and energy on his restaurant, where he's now met by Adonis, who reveals to him his relation to Apollo and asks if he could train him. And Rocky, although declining at first, eventually agrees to do it, admiring his persistence. As they begin their training, Donnie also starts up a serious relationship with a woman living in the apartment below his, named Bianca Taylor, who we learn is an aspiring musician that also suffers from progressive hearing loss, but it hasn't yet affected her singing career. Back at Mick's gym though, the place's current owner, Pete Sparino, a childhood friend of Rocky's, approaches them about a fight between Donnie and his son, Leo the Lion Sparino, the number 4 ranked light heavyweight in the world with a 17-0 record, and they ultimately accept, forcing them to ramp up their training. So, as things become more intense, Rocky invites Donnie to live with him, and also moves them from Mick's gym to the Front Street gym in North Philly, as he doesn't want Donnie training in the same place as his opponent. And there, Donnie makes huge strides in his ability before the night of the fight eventually arrives. But moments prior to the matchup, Rocky's approached by Pete, who's discovered through his connections in LA that Donnie's the son of Creed, but he agrees to keep this secret as a favor to Rocky. It doesn't take him long to go back on his word though, as the morning following Donnie's knockout victory over Leo, various news outlets begin reporting on Donnie and Apollo's shared genetics, which eventually results in them receiving a phone call from Tommy Holliday, the manager of light heavyweight world champion Pretty Ricky Conlon, who offers Donnie a match against his client in what'll likely be his last fight, as he has an impending prison sentence that'll force him to retire. But in order for the fight to happen, Holliday says Adonis must change his last name to Creed, which Donnie's hesitant to do at first, since he wanted to stay away from his father's shadow, but he eventually decides to take the opportunity. Just as they begin their training though, their lives take a sudden turn when Rocky collapses during one of their sessions and is later diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a form of cancer. He decides against undergoing chemotherapy though, despite Donnie's pleas, as he's seen what it does to a person that, in the end, likely won't even make it. And he claims he's okay with dying, since everything else he had has already moved on. But this statement upsets Donnie, who believed he and Rocky had built up a familial relationship, and he later lets out his frustrations upon arriving backstage at one of Bianca's shows, when he gets into a fight with the showrunner, who he felt disrespected him by calling him Baby Creed. As a result of his actions, Bianca decides to put an end to their relationship for now, but although he's currently unable to fix things with her, he and Rocky are soon able to make amends. And Rocky, after Donnie claims he won't take the fight if Rocky doesn't also fight for his life, agrees to undergo chemo. So the two get back to work from both the gym and Rocky's hospital room, and despite things getting really bad at points, Rocky's health eventually begins to improve, and he's able to be in Donnie's corner on the night of the fight, along with Bianca, who he'd helped Donnie make up with. Just before they make their way to the ring though, Donnie receives a gift sent by Marianne, who hadn't spoken to him since he left LA, as she was upset with his decision to pursue the life of a boxer. But she's moved past those initial frustrations, and has now sent him shorts for the fight based on the ones Apollo wore in his first fight with Rocky, with his two surnames, Creed and Johnson, on the front and back. So he puts them on and meets with Conlon in the ring. who he struggles to keep up with in the first round, but he manages to have a much better showing in the second. And things continue to go back and forth for the next 8 rounds, until Conlon eventually lands a huge hook to knock Adonis down in the 11th. But although it appears he may not get up for a moment, Donnie's able to pull himself back to his feet and make it to the 12th and final round. And in said final round, he actually manages to knock down Conlon for the first time in his career. But Conlon just manages to beat the count of 10, bringing the fight to an end, which Donnie ultimately loses via split decision. Still, despite the loss, Adonis managed to gain Conlon's respect, as well as the entire world's, and he continues to build on this debut fight over the next couple years, with him winning 6 straight, all by knockout, as he moved up from a light heavyweight to a heavyweight, and he now finds himself in a World Heavyweight Championship bout with champion Danny Stuntman Wheeler, trained by Tony Little Duke Evers. Also in the last 2 years, we see Rocky actually manage to come out on top in his battle with cancer, as he continues to be by Donnie's side for his world title matchup, which he ultimately wins after knocking Wheeler out in the 4th round. Becoming world champion isn't the only big thing to happen for Donnie that night though, as he later decides to propose to Bianca, who easily says yes. But just when it appears he's on top of the world, a familiar name returns from the shadows, as on the news he sees footage of a press conference in which promoter Buddy Marcel, seated next to Ivan Drago and his son Victor Drago, who has a 25-0 record in Russia, sets out a challenge to Donnie for him to face Victor for the world title. And as this footage airs, Rocky's met at his restaurant by Ivan Drago himself, who discusses their fight all those years ago and the impact it had on his life, as it costed him his country's respect as well as his wife's, who left him shortly after. So he's now looking to regain his family's past glory through his son in a matchup with Adonis, but Rocky doesn't seem at all interested. Donnie, though, wants to take the fight, so Rocky tries to give him reason not to, since he actually believes he'll lose. And this fact angers Adonis, who says he's taking the fight with or without him, so Rocky says it'll have to be without. Frustrated and hurt, Donnie then decides to move with Bianca back to LA, and shortly after arriving there, they learn that Bianca is actually pregnant, adding on to what he could lose if things go wrong in the Drago fight. But still, he moves forward with it, and begins training with Little Duke until the eventual night of the fight, which leans heavily in the favor of Victor, as he appears to break Creed's ribs with a body shot that knocks him down in the 2nd round. And he continues to attack those ribs in the 3rd, knocking Adonis down to a knee, before landing a huge uppercut as he's kneeling, resulting in an immediate disqualification. The damage had already been done though, as Adonis laid numb on the mat, but fortunately, he later awakens in the hospital, where he's then met by Rocky, who's come to apologize for not being in his corner, but Donnie isn't open to any reconciliation. Over the next several months, Donnie really struggles to deal with what went down, and he becomes disconnected from his loved ones, as well as the boxing world, while Victor and Ivan have found themselves once again in the good graces of Russia's most powerful and influential people, including Victor's mother and Ivan's ex-wife, Ludmila Drago, although Victor seems to not want anything to do with any of them, due to how cruelly they treated his father. Donnie, meanwhile, is eventually pulled out of this slump thanks to Rocky, who travels to LA so the two can finally make amends, just before the birth of Donnie and Bianca's daughter, Amara, who inherits her mother's hearing disorder and is born deaf. Following her birth, Donnie expresses the desire to fight Drago one more time, sure that he can unquestionably beat him this time around. So, after gaining Bianca's blessing, he, Rocky, and Little Duke begin training for the rematch, which the Dragos demand take place in Russia. And for this fight, Rocky has them change up their training methods, which Donnie quickly appears to reap the benefits of once in the ring, as he has a much better first round outing against Drago. Still, the fights vary back and forth throughout, and once again, Drago's able to land a huge shot to the abdomen that appears to break Adonis's ribs at the end of the 9th round, prompting Rocky to consider stopping the fight, although only for a moment, before instead sending Donnie back in there to knock Drago down. But unfortunately, the next knock to the mat is Adonis, but he's able to pull himself up and eventually land a few rib shots of his own, before dropping Victor to the mat 2 separate times, prompting Ludmila and her associates to exit the stadium. Still, Drago's able to make it to his feet, though only for Creed to begin repeatedly pummeling him in the corner, which forces Ivan to throw in the towel. Throughout this entire process, Ivan had been very rough and cold towards his son, but in defeat, he assures him it's okay and embraces him, while Adonis celebrates his victory with everyone in his corner, not including Rocky, who decides to stay out of the spotlight this time.
It's your time.
Following his victory, Adonis goes to visit his father's grave for the first time with his wife and daughter, while Rocky decides to finally leave Philadelphia and reunite with his son, who he regrettably hadn't spoken to in a very long time, but fortunately, his son welcomes him with open arms. And that was everything you need to know before watching Creed 3. If you enjoyed the video, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And also let us know in the comments below which film in the Rocky franchise is your favorite. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.